You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
A source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the province.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech.
With your host, Omar and Khateeb.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Contemplative neuroscience, or contemplative science, is this very new emerging field of research that focuses on the changes within the mind, brain, and body as a result of contemplative practices, things such as mindfulness-based meditation, dream yoga, and many other things. And it's a fascinating area because I think that, especially in the age of social media, we're glued to our devices and everything. And so the idea of getting more control and influence over our mind has such a profound effect on our body. We've seen that in medicine, the effects of stress and anxiety in terms of the manifestations of different pathologies. And so this field is so new and interesting that, a lot of research is coming out as a result of it, but there are very few people who are actually experts in it. And this is why I decided to connect to Dr. David Vago, who is a pioneer in contemplative neuroscience. You can learn more by going to his website, contemplativeneurosciences.com. And it's a fascinating field. A big shout out to my very close friend, a pioneer in his own right in the AR, VR world, which is Howard Rose, who connected us to. And so in this episode, we talk about contemplative neuroscience, but also the devices. Yes, there are actually medical devices that are consumer available these days for practicing contemplative neuroscience and enhancing these effects. It's a fascinating episode. It's one of those areas that I've always been interested in. And so I think you guys will enjoy it. So check it out. Here's our episode with Dr. David Vago, pioneer of contemplative neuroscience. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Really interesting episode today because it kind of combines something that we're used to seeing in the last 5 years in the consumer markets, but there are actually devices and technology that have been developed around it, and that's the field of contemplative neuroscience. And also, you can call it, maybe mindfulness, right? But there's a little bit deeper topic involved in that. I'm joined today by one of the men who actually pioneered the space, Dr. David Vago, who joined as a mutual friend of my good friend Howard Rose. So shout out to Howard. David, thanks so much for coming on the show. How are you doing today?
Oh, wonderful. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad we can make this work.
Yeah, totally. So look, maybe the first place I want to start with is that, I think there is this explosion of mindfulness apps and tech and everything the last 10 years. I think 2020, 2021 saw these huge kind of inflated valuations. And then again, who wasn't, what valuation wasn't inflated during that time of these kind of apps? And so I'm wondering, maybe the first place to start is what is contemplative neuroscience? How's that different from let's say mindfulness or something?
Yeah, it's a good place to start. Yeah. So contemplative research and in contemplative science really is a scholarly and scientific investigation of what we're calling contemplative practices. Really what falls under the umbrella of mind and body practices. So meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, those types of exercises or mental training practices that you find in integrative health and those kinds of settings. And so the neuroscience or contemplative neuroscience is really the use of neuroscientific methods and types of ways of observing the brain and the mind as they work together to understand what are the mechanisms, what are driving the health-related outcomes specific to meditation. And now that also includes psychedelics. Psychedelics is a way to manifest the mind, to gain insight into the mind. So psychedelics and meditation are really under the umbrella of what we're calling contemplative neuroscience. And I should say one other thing. It also, there's a spectrum of what contemplative research is really getting at. It can involve the study of everyday experiences of absorption in an activity, being in the zone, being in the flow, psychological and philosophical inquiry into the nature of mind, as well as the sort of the neurobiological correlates of those experiences. So that's when we talk about contemplative science and contemplative neuroscience, it's not just about psychedelics or meditation, but really about what it's like to be in that kind of state of awareness that could be also a non-dual experience where you feel so immersed that you feel one with everything. It breaks down the boundaries between self and others.
Yeah, and I think it's a fascinating area because, I think it's very relevant to entrepreneurship. One of the most sort of profound things that I realized in the last few years, just in my study of this, is that, the difference between, let's say, reality and perception, it's actually kind of a blurred line. And just, for example, if we look at like neurolinguistic programming, the power of learning how to apply like reframing a situation like through gratitude or just reframing it, like for me as an entrepreneur, and I tell a lot of founders this, is like, look, you're going through a really tough time right now. I said, but what if God spoke to you or the universe and said, hey, in 90 days, like you're going to have like what all your dreams and wishes will come true. You have this big event. If you knew that, you would change the way you acted every single day. So why not just pretend to be like that? Does that start diving into the contemplative neuroscience that you're talking about? Because I think mindfulness and meditation is like limited to like one period of time, like 5, 10, 15 minutes. You're talking about something that, how do you sort of change your essence as a person throughout the day when you're conscious and awake? Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is where I think there's what I would call an inner revolution. We're better understanding how these practices are not just sort of a alternative to traditional, medical approaches to healing, but they are they're now becoming part of the mainstream into mental health practices, right? So how do we gain insight into our own mental habits and use that insight specifically to transform our behaviors and the way we behave in the real world, how we control our impulses. So there is a level of kind of evolving our natural human consciousness to a place where we can be better humans, flourish, and evolve as one humanity. And we all know we're in sort of facing lots of existential threats. And this becomes like a transition point or an inflection point for humanity to use these types of practices as a form of technology for our own minds.
Got it. Can you, we hear the concept or the term mindfulness kind of thrown around all the time. Can you kind of give us a definition of mindfulness in terms of, how do I put this? Kind of like a neuroscientific basis of mindfulness and how it essentially impacts brain and cognition?
Of course. So to keep in context, so we have to contextualize the differences between meditation and mindfulness. Meditation can be, it comes from, it's an English word, but there's Sanskrit and Pali words like bhavana and bhavana is a word specifically about cultivation and cultivation about habits of mind. And so the original sort of description of meditation from a Buddhist or a Hindu Vedanta type of background really talks about meditation as a form of developing insight and awareness of our nature of mind. And even in the the Old Testament and in Christian contemplative traditions, meditation has been used also as a way to better understand the nature of mind, but also from a better understanding of the divine. How do we become more attuned to and aware of the God within us and all around us? Now, if we take those two sort of concepts from different traditions and we say, well, what's the common factor here? The common factor of meditation is really about self-regulating our attention. In essence, that is what meditation is. So anything that you do that regulates your attention in an intentional way can be a form of meditation. Now, mindfulness is a very specific form of meditation. It can be described as paying attention in a particular way, non-judgmentally, in the present moment, and in a very open, curious kind of way of understanding the world as it arises and passes. And that comes from the Pali root for mindfulness is actually sati, and sati really refers to the process of remembering and the process of not forgetting that we have be constantly aware of what's happening in our minds and around us. So if you think about mindfulness as really just a state of meta awareness, being able to maintain some level of awareness throughout your daily life, no matter what you're doing. So you are doing things much more with intentionality behind it. I think that's one of the ways we can describe mindfulness as a state, just being aware of where our mind is at any moment. That's probably the best way to distinguish between mindfulness and meditation itself.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. I think, it's even more important than ever these days. I mean, I think there are clinical applications to this, like when you're dealing with somebody, the obvious ones are mental health, but people who are in pain management, for example, I think there's clear clinical applications there. But I think it's even more important to regulate and develop these things from now, just because if you think about the importance of attention, right? We have tools and technologies that are great, but at the same time, they're essentially fighting for our attention on on a minute by minute basis. The human mind was never evolved to deal with something like this, where every single minute there's thousands of inputs trying to compete for my attention, and it has kind of its own energy. So I feel like these days, I think meditation and everything is great, but I think that we have to kind of take it to another level where we have some kind of feedback. And this is where I want to talk a little bit about devices. So I started seeing a lot of devices in the neurotech space, mainly consumer, about monitoring your brain waves for meditation feedback and everything. And I don't know like how real this is. Is this kind of like, is that a real thing, first of all? Or is it kind of like, really clever marketing?
A little bit of both. So there are a lot of limitations about what we know and what we don't know about what meditation does to our brains, and how then can we leverage the data that comes from the neurosciences and use technology to try to enhance that state, or to facilitate the achievement of those states faster. So when we measure the brain, we use different types of tools. One of them is an MRI scanner, where we get into a big magnet and we look at the structure and the function of the brain in real time. And there's some benefits of doing that in terms of spatial resolution. You get a real good picture of what the brain looks like. But what we call in neuroscience is blobology, is better understanding the blobs that sort of become active during particular states, and trying to make some sort of narrative and sense of what's going on in the brain, given what we know about functional neuroanatomy. The other way we measure of what's going on in the brain is through electroencephalography, or EEG. And that is has a really good temporal resolution, with not as good spatial resolution. But the idea there is that in millisecond resolution, you can see where there's populations of activity happening around the brain. That's been probably the biggest target for these neurotech kind of devices. Sort of neurofeedback focuses on trying to either measure and then provide feedback related to those states of meditation, or to stimulate the brain in ways that it can mimic those particular states that we can measure using EEG. So I'll just name some of the different states or frequencies that we measure in time frequency analyses, and what meaning that they have in the context of meditation, and why these sort of neurotech devices are good and maybe not so good at really mimicking them or cultivating them. The first one is, if we go from maybe the slowest to the fastest types of brain signatures, the slowest, and this is again in time, using a signature called delta waves, right? It's very slow, 3 to 4 hertz. So 3 to 4 times a second, your brain is cycling, and it's very synchronized. You only see that kind of activity when you're sleeping, in deep sleep. And you often don't really want to generate that kind of brain activity unless you really want to be sleeping. So in some regards, there are some efforts to try to mimic those states, or to provide feedback for delta activity when one wants to sleep or get deep restorative sleep. As we go a little bit faster, we can start moving into 4 to 8 hertz, which is the theta band frequency. Now, theta is one of the most amazing signatures that you see in the brain because it relates to a few things. One, when you look at the sort of micro level inside the brain and individual neurons, when they're firing at this rate theta, for example, around 8 hertz, you see maximum amount of memory consolidation happening in structures like the hippocampus. Now that's really interesting. Now, how does that work on a global level? Because when we put sensors on the top of our scalp, they can't really measure what's happening at the the smaller structure level, like a very specific anatomical part like the hippocampus. But what you do see is that in the midline parts of our brain structure, there's this area, these areas that follow our cingulate gyrus in the middle of our brain. And that midline will start firing in this particular frequency around 8 hertz, maximally in the frontal and midline structures. So more towards the front and not as much in the back. And what that shows is that, or at least what it correlates with, is flow. So when you're in the zone and very focused and concentrated, you'll see this frontal midline theta. It is probably one of the best signatures that we have for focused concentration or very good focused meditative state. That's theta. One interesting point about theta is that there's this frequency. It's called the Schumann frequency. Apparently, there's not a lot of evidence for this, but that the ionosphere around our Earth apparently is fluctuating at this particular frequency at 8 hertz. So people have fallen in love with this particular frequency, 8 hertz, and at different harmonics. There's some music tech that's
Like binaural beats.
Binaural beats is trying to specifically get at 8 hertz. That is one of the biggest areas that we're trying. That this is one area of neurofeedback that uses music, and we can talk about binaural beats and the evidence behind it, and music in general, because that's what one of the things Howard and I talk about a lot is music and how you can entrain the brain. So how do you get it to fire at 8 hertz when you're just sitting around doing nothing? Music is one way to do that. And this particular 8 hertz frequency, if you follow the harmonics, people have tried to generate sound at 432 hertz, and that just happens to be a harmonic of 8 hertz. And when you can do that, there's some evidence that it decreases anxiety and the stress response.
I definitely believe in the power of it. I mean, it just, without seeing clinical research, it does make sense that based on what you hear, and sound is essentially just a range of vibrations, right? Yeah. That what you hear, it's going to have an impact on your brain. There is a company, because you can look stuff up like this on Spotify, but like you have no idea how good it is. It could be some 16-year-old putting together a playlist. But there is a company called Brain.fm. I'm not, and so I subscribe to them, and some people are like, well, why are you paying money for this like website to give you this? I'm like, well, because it's all like curated and they know what they're doing. So they have like focus, sleep, relaxation, and I have used the focus a few times, and I've tested the sleep, but like, for example, I needed to take a nap the other day, so I went ahead and put the Unwind playlist on that they have, and they have an app, of course. And I put some over-ear headphones, and I got induced into like a really like relaxing state, and it's just this like sounds like it's very interesting. Just for the audience, actually, I'm gonna go to Brain FM.
Just try it. Yeah, Brain FM. There's a lot of these apps out there, and they're growing because the evidence is starting to.
I'm gonna put the focus on because I don't want to put the sleep on, and then someone sues me saying, "Oh, like I was listening to this in the car." But this is so this is the one for deep.
It's not that good.
It's not that good.
It's only falling asleep right away because I heard it. This is the focus, right?
This is the focus. Let me put one more. Hold on. And so at first, like when I heard this, I was like, doesn't sound like it's anything unique, but because of the frequency they have it at, and it's sort of repetitive, like it does seem to work quite well. I've always been, and again, I think for a lot of the founders and entrepreneurs, when you have to sit down and get into like flow state, there's all kinds of things. It's like this new frontier that everybody's trying to discover, which is the frontiers of the mind of what do you eat, listen to, do, etc., to sort of induce that kind of state.
Oh yeah. But it's not an exact science yet. Like a lot of music and the effect on the brain is emotionally constrained. And that is a really important point, because what that means is that the effect of music on your brain is highly dependent upon the emotional experience that you have at an individual level. So there's differences in how you experience, like, say, heavy metal, or how I experience heavy metal. Some people love it and find it relaxing, right? But there's no specific effect of that music on the brain except for how it's emotionally affecting you. So there's an emotional experience that also has a profound effect on how it impacts our brain activity. Now, we're also trying to find out, is there a physical reason why certain music will entrain the brain in particular states or not? And this is where binaural beats comes in. This is probably where the brain.fm, also health tunes. There's different apps that are trying to physically entrain your brain to fire in these states, this particular frequency at 8 hertz, right? That's, we want to get in the flow. That's the one we want to try to hit. And there's ways that have been successful, but they don't sound as good, right? So there's these things called isochronic tones, and they're just basically the flickering on and off of sound. Boop, 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 kind of boring, nothing as exciting or ambient as like you might, get when you're listening to, some curated playlist. But it shows to be more effective in training the brain in that rhythm when you can use these isochronic tones or visual light. So if you flicker light at the same frequency and the sound at the same frequency, it shows the most maximal effect on brain entrainment. And this is independent of the emotional experience, right? Emotionally, it's like isochronic tones are boring, but there's one company called Cognito Therapeutics that got huge amount of investment to focus on reducing inflammation in the brain using these kinds of tools, because they found in the animal literature that this is maximally effective when you use light flickering. So you wear these goggles and listen to sound, these isochronic tones at the same time. And I talked about delta and theta, but there's a few other frequencies that are relevant here. For example, alpha, which is 8 to 12 hertz, is really important. Your brain fires in this sort of synchronous way, especially near the occipital lobe and in parts of the parietal, around mostly towards the back. But you see it globally across the whole brain when you're relaxed. So if you just close your eyes and lay back and just zone out, or just feel relaxed, you'll see this increased alpha activity. So that's also an important
Interesting
brain state that you want to mimic. I'll just say one other one, and because it all relates back to what we're talking about, is the gamma band. So after alpha, you go into a beta band, and beta is like between like 12 to maybe 30 hertz, 25 hertz. That's like mixed amplitude, mixed frequency. It's when your brain is active and doing stuff. But after 30 hertz, after 40 hertz, you start moving into what's called the gamma band. And so that's about 40 hertz and greater. And in that band, it's fascinating, actually. You don't see it very often, but it happens when you have sort of a gestalt experience of a concept where it all sort of synchronizes between different parts of your brain, and you want to have like an aha kind of moment for you conceptually. And also you see it in the advanced meditators while they are in a non-dual state of awareness, when they're expressing a non-referential state of compassion, where there's no specific object, but you're expressing compassion to all sentient beings. You see gamma band increases, and you see this particular frequency in animals maximally when they are activating a system called the glymphatic system of the brain, which I'll get into if you want.
That's a system essentially. I mean, that's why sleep is so important, because if you don't get enough sleep, your glymphatic system is not, essentially it's just a way that your brain is like washing itself out and removing a lot of inflammatory markers, etc. You don't get sleep, that glymphatic system gets backed up, and this is why like sleep deprivation is technically a form of torture.
That's exactly right. In fact, what we're doing a study right now at Vanderbilt University to look at the glymphatic system and how it's affected by sleep in neurodegenerative disorders. So people with MS, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, all the neurodegenerative disorders show decreases in activity in that glymphatic system. And there's a relationship with those people because they don't get as much sleep as they get older. What we're realizing is that there's a restorative effect of sleep, right? We all know when we sleep, we feel better. One of those restorative effects is this activation of the lymphatic system. So if you're not getting a lot of sleep, which happens as we get older, as we age, you are decreasing the activity of this metabolic waste removal system. So the more you can sleep, the better. And we are now testing it in meditators to show, and some of the preliminary evidence suggests that meditation, similarly to sleep, can improve the activity of this lymphatic system. And this is not known by anyone right now. This is like brand new, the newest data you can imagine on the system, and it's just starting to take off. So the question is like, how do you improve the efficiency and activity of this lymphatic system? And meditation seems to be one of those ways. So we're comparing it to sleep, and we're comparing it to breath work practices. So paced breathing, for example. And at this point, you can say that meditation is actually better than paced breathing at activating the lymphatic system.
Interesting. I'm wondering, from an investment standpoint, because I see a lot of neurotech coming out, and more so for entrepreneurs to kind of tap into this. For me, I was like an early adopter of Headspace back in the day. And so one thing I'm wondering now is, after a while, like, I don't want to say meditation gets boring, but like, as a entrepreneur, you kind of treat everything sort of like an athlete where you're like, am I getting better and everything? And so one of the areas that I'm wondering is when I look at neurotech, like neurofeedback devices online, I see, like, for example, one of the big ones that you and I discussed, and I believe you consulted for them on their algorithm. Muse is one. I see Mendy, but I see such a huge range, like things from Muse and Mendy and some other ones. They're anywhere from like $200 to $400. I see some devices that are $4,000, and I'm wondering, like, what should an entrepreneur look for? Because I think like a lot of entrepreneurs are trying to train themselves so that they can get in the right mindset. I think, just a side note, I have a son, and I'm starting to think about like school later on. And I'm starting to realize, I'm like, kids don't need to be in school sitting down and studying from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Like, there's a lot of kids who are in homeschool that go 8 to 11, 8 to 12 every day. Even me myself as an entrepreneur, I'm like, I don't need to be working like 8 to 5 every day. Like, I think I can have spurts and, have focus times, and so I'm wondering what advice, what's the tech you can recommend us?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, you want to make sure that there's data. Show me the data, right? I mean, you want to see that the device has
like they have publications on PubMed and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Show me the science, right? So I mentioned Cognito Therapeutics just because they just happen to be one of the companies at sort of the forefront of using music or isochronic tones and these goggles or glasses to induce brain states that mimic the ones that I mentioned, right? So it turns out that gamma band activity specifically is going to be helpful for activating the lymphatic system.
Let me bring them up. They looks like their focus. It's pretty interesting. So that's their device right there, and they're focused specifically on Alzheimer's.
Yeah. So like I said, inflammation is the key.
Oh, and they even have like a phase 2 study going on. Wow. Okay.
Well, that's the data you want to see. If you're investing in neurotech. So I just gave you the 4 states that you're looking for. The lymphatic system is responsive to gamma band activity. The Muse headset is a proprietary algorithm that I did sign an NDA a while back. I don't know exactly what they're doing right now, but I can say that if alpha band is important for relaxation, and theta band is really important for focused concentration, right? Being in the flow, in the zone. Maybe there's some combination of that being used for their feedback. Those are the 4 states: your gamma band, your alpha, your theta, and your delta. Those are the ones you're sort of that all neurotech has to be working with, because there's not much else you can do with time frequency types of analyses. There are some more complicated micro states that people are starting to look into, but it's much harder to incorporate into any sort of neurotech. And then when it comes to awakened kind of states, awakening or in feelings of enlightenment or non-duality, which are really areas of showing you that you're progressing as a meditator. There are some people who are trying to use things like focused ultrasound. Jay Sanguinetti and Shinzen Young. Shinzen Young is a teacher he's a more contemporary mindfulness teacher, and they are working together to develop use a very advanced technology called focused ultrasound, where they use ultrasound, just like you're getting when you're pregnant and you have to use ultrasound to image the fetus. They use ultrasounds at different frequencies and different intensities to stimulate parts of the brain at the resolution of a grain of rice, okay, and without being invasive, right? It goes through the skull. It's just sound at a particular frequency, and you can target very specific structures. They're trying to...
Is that a form of like neurofeedback therapy? Neurostim. Do they use like essentially like EEG leads that they kind of put on your scalp, and then I think I went
That's to remember that. So the EEG leads are receptors receiving information data, right? What frequencies are they firing at? And then the stimulation technology is, can we disrupt the system significantly that it changes the state in a particular way towards a phenomenology of being awakened or non-dual. They like to call it equanimity, where they're focusing on so equanimity is an important concept in meditation too, to basically not be perturbed by stressful stimuli. When you're in the context of stress, you get reactive, and it can ruin the rest of your day. And some of the meditation training is about how you can effectively manage that kind of stress. And instead of taking it as a threat, you see it as a challenge, and you can recover quickly. So if you can use neurotech that can not only disrupt how you respond or react to a stressor, but how quickly you can recover from a stressor, you're in a win-win situation there.
So when you look at things like what Mendy, or let's use Muse as an example, because that's what you're most familiar with. They have these headbands. How essentially is it recommended to use it? Is it while you're sleeping, while you meditate, and what I'm trying to understand is how can, let's say, an entrepreneur or a high performing person use this technology to improve their ability to enter flow state, to enhance
performance. Yeah, for sure. Their goal has been to really focus on the novice practitioner. Advanced practitioners, I've from my own anecdotal experience has been that it's not as helpful to the advanced practitioners. Like, well, I already have a stable meditation practice. I'm just using it now on my own. You don't really need a lot of technology to tell you that whether you're advancing or not. It is helpful to get feedback from a teacher. But if you want to advance, let's start from the beginning. If you're a novice and you've never tried meditation, Muse headset's going to be really helpful because it provides feedback directly related to your concentration and relaxation. So if you are trying to maintain concentration without distraction, here's a tool to help provide feedback. So you'll get little birds that chirp, or you'll get a change in the sound of the scenery around you that changes whenever you are doing it right, whenever you're focused or whenever you're relaxed, or some combination of the two. But then, it could over time get a little bit annoying, or you start competing with yourself. You start lose the benefit as you continue to use the device. But I think data in general is where, if you're an investor, you want to find what data is going to be most useful for you, right? So the first thing was, does it help you give you feedback on your concentration and relaxation? Okay, great. There's a tool that can do that, and fairly well. But then, you can look at things even like your respiration rate, heart rate variability. These are all proven metrics that can correlate with your own phenomenological experience. And you're doing it right.
And there's a company whose name is brilliant, I think, that focuses. I actually got their device, which focuses on real-time heart rate variability, which is called Heart Math.
Oh yeah, Heart Math.
Yeah, that connects to your earlobe, and it just measure, and it actually works pretty well, because when I'm meditating, if I have like a side thought or something, it'll pick it up and like ding me, and I'm like, oh, all right, like I'm actually not paying attention to what I'm doing. I need to get back.
Yeah, that's right. It's a fairly robust signal, which is really just about how much your heartbeat varies between beat to beat. Now, let's keep in mind if the maximum performance athletes are going to have large variability in your beat to beat heart rate. And that's where showing you that your heart is responding very well to the changes in your environment. If you have a very stable heartbeat, that may be good for showing that your resilience of your cardiovascular system, but not to its perturbation. We're inundated with stresses in our everyday life, and the best heart indicators or indicators of cardiovascular wellness is that you have great variability. When you can go from 60 beats per minute all the way to 180 and come right back down to 60 really quickly is the best sort of metrics for managing stress effectively. And so heart rate variability is just a very robust metric for how you respond to stressors. So it's something you can track. Even Apple Health products will track your heart rate variability on your watch, or from just you can use it now. The sensor, just using a light on the flashlight can be a good way to measure your heart rate variability. So there's a lot of different Welltory is another app that does this fairly well and tracks your heart rate variability over time and integrates with the APIs for your Apple, for your iPhones. But all these metrics are going to be giving you something extra. So if you have EEG for brainwave activity for relaxation and concentration, inflammation, and you have heart rate variability for stress response, and you even can look at temperature. Oura Ring does a pretty good job of measuring body temperature. Now there's good data showing that body temperature can actually predict your mood states. So there's that. So temperature, and then and respiration is another big thing. How you breathe is critical to your everyday health and wellness. And if you get feedback with your respiration activity and how it resonates with your heart, I think HeartMath does this really well. There's a resonant frequency around 6 to 7 breaths per minute, where you're optimizing your ability for your cardiovascular and respiratory systems to be in sync with each other and to have the best optimum performance in terms of energy metabolism. So how efficiently are you metabolizing energy? Are you using energy as you are just sitting around and working or focusing, or whether you're at in the middle of some sort of athletic event? So those are all important physiological biomarkers that haven't really been maximally integrated into like a data dashboard.
Yeah, and I think it's important as you kind of come up with these metrics and understanding. I think it's not only good for again, the use case here clinically is like for patients in the hospital recovering and everything, but also for like entrepreneurs, company work culture, those kind of things. I mean, for myself, I work from home, and like one of those things, one is like breathing, actually. We do it automatically, but a lot of people don't know how to breathe appropriately. So that's one thing I've really focused on. But even things like I have this thing called AirThings. It's a little device that sits in my office that measures carbon dioxide levels. And so like right now it's yellow. And so by the time we finish this podcast, it's going to be red. So I'm going to open the window and like leave the office for a little bit just to air out. So, cause like you don't realize like a lot of times when you're like starting to drag in the afternoon, I had this and I didn't realize. I'm like, oh, it's because like I don't have a window open, everything's shut, and I've been sitting here under the lights breathing, and like there's a high level of carbon dioxide within the room. Yeah,
exactly. So any data about your physiology is going to be good feedback. So that's the biofeedback and the neurofeedback are, they work well together.
I got to ask, as a scientist in the space, what's your take on nootropics? Do you take anything, yourself? What's your stack?
Oh yeah. I listen to Andrew Huberman a lot, and I like he usually has a very good summary of all the different nootropics. He doesn't like that word, but I think there's definitely something to it, especially when it comes to different mushrooms, supplements, or any of the other supplements that exist out there for for maximum or optimizing your performance. So I usually, stick to his plans are usually quite good. Everything from just, omega-3s to choline and phosphosterine and alpha GPC. These are all really good, I think, brain optimizers. And there's good data for a lot of the supplements that we talk about. And those are, I do take supplements every once in a while myself. I've been curious about the effects, and I do follow the data. And I think the science matters, right? So we have to really track to see how these types of nootropics really function in real world environments across different types of people. But we don't have the perfect solution yet for what's going to be best for any individual. Sometimes you want to just take something on a daily basis that's going to be maximally effective for all your systems, but every system sort of responds differentially, right? So sleep is really responsive to things, the stimulants that you put into your body. And if you put the wrong stimulants in at the wrong time, you're going to decrease your sleep efficiency and quality. So there's also, I think, about in terms of supplements, learning the best timing for when you take these supplements during the day, that you can't always just take a supplement once a day and expect it to take care of everything, right? So that science, I think, is one of the most interesting aspects of supplements. It's like, when do you take things, the chronometry, or just the timing in which you take supplements to help promote.
What about you? Do you take any of these things, and when do you take them?
Yeah, I do take. Well, I let's see. So I do have this like a multivitamin that has a lot of the supplements in it that I think are helpful, including magnesium for maximum sleep, but then the vitamin D, which is really good for inflammation.
What's the multivitamin you take, if you don't mind me asking?
What kind?
Yeah, which one is it?
Oh, I don't even know. Like I've switched around a lot. I'm still trying to look around for what I think is best. And I'll say I do listen to Huerman's advice almost religiously when because he's good at finding the data and the background. So I'll look at some of the brands that he talks about. I can't probably list off which brands specifically because I've tried different ones over the years. But things like omega-3s, choline, alpha GPC, and phosphosterine. Those are certainly things that I've taken as supplements and continue to take, not necessarily on a regular basis, but as much as I want to experiment and test on myself. Things like turmeric and bioperine together have been shown to be very effective at reducing inflammation. So, after a long day of skiing or hiking or something, I'll take some of that to help with inflammation that happens in the body.
The turmeric bioperine combination, you take that just as needed, not something you take daily, correct?
Yeah, as needed. And usually in the mornings are the best way to clear it out. Just like we talked about how sleep is so important for metabolic waste removal, that taking any sort of anti-inflammatory is probably best in the morning, right? First thing you do, drink a whole glass of water and hydrate, get your sunlight, as Huberman will also recommend, but take the turmeric. That's usually the best time. So again, timing matters when you take these supplements, right? And that I think that's important. And if your body also gets used to a lot of supplements. So if you're taking, say, alpha GPC or phosphosterine, on a regular basis, your body also sensitizes to that kind of supplement, and that's kind of problematic, right? If it's going to respond maximally to these things, you want to be able to take it only on a small or increments or intervals that aren't regular necessarily.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of as we sort of round things out, I'm wondering, what are some areas of contemplative neuroscience that you're most excited about moving forward, whether it's consumer or clinical applications?
Well, so the thing right now, I'm very excited about the use of meditation and music for reducing inflammation, because that's something that I've been studying. It's at the forefront of integrative health and medicine. This NIH is very interested in it, and there's a lot of funding now for it. But it's exciting because we're realizing that inflammation is one of the biggest problems for our brain. And how do you reduce that inflammation maximally? Some of these supplements, I think, will be critical in understanding how best to use them for our brain. But if we can use meditation and music in a way that combines to maximally reduce inflammation, then we can better regulate the impact of not only physical activity, but also the things that we consume, the sort of toxins that we consume in our bodies. How do we maximize the restorative effects of our body's natural systems to perform maximally and without the cortical atrophy that happens just from natural aging, because we know that these supplements, that sleep, that meditation, exercise, nutrition, these are all like the things we talk about all the time. We know that there's data, very clear data, that it improves our outcomes maximally. So it's a good thing to do.
For a lot of this research, one of the problems is that there's all kinds of things that I would love to see studies done, but these things take money. Where's a lot of this research essentially being funded? Is it mainly through private industries?
Yeah. So right now, luckily, the NIH is interested in neuroinflammation and the effects of meditation and music on neuroinflammation. So NIH is funding these things. When it comes to technology specific to, say, advanced meditators or advanced meditation and the effects on, say, states of awakening, feeling like there's progression towards what some people contextualize as enlightenment, less money from the federal government. So most of that money is coming from private donations and philanthropy. That's how the psychedelic movement actually got started. I mean, it would not have gotten any funding. In fact, funding is just starting to come from the NIH. And most of the funding that has funded psychedelics has been private money. And now it's going to be legalized by the FDA to have MDMA and psilocybin in the context of mental health. These paradigms are shifting, as we speak. So that there's a lot of interest in the cross section of psychedelics, meditation, and music. Music is a critical part of the therapeutic effects of what we're noticing in psychedelics, but also in meditation. So how do you take music, meditation, and psychedelics and combine them maximally with all these like great tools for neurofeedback, biofeedback, and having it in an informative way show up for the user, right? So you have these like the Apple or the Meta, the XR, right? So all of the tech that's allowing us to visualize data is going to help us figure out how best to use that data as we go through our everyday life.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that's most interesting is that, like, I think maybe it's just me, but I feel like post-COVID, we've kind of entered this world of like, the quantified self, so it started with like wearables, measuring heart rate variability and everything. And people become more and more interested in that just because it does have a profound effect on changing behavior. For me, wearing a Whoop device, I've significantly reduced my alcohol consumption from like every weekend I'd have like, an IPA or two. And then now, like, I don't know, I have a beer every it's like 6 months, not even. So it's on really rare occasion, right? Because like I saw the effects of it on my sleep. The next thing that I'm about to do is like, I think I'm using data to guilt trip myself to change my behavior. So like for me, I have a bit of a sweet tooth. So every now and then, like on the weekend, like I'll have a crumble cookie or something, right? And so I'm gonna go and get one of the continuous glucose monitoring devices with one of the apps is like levels and percent. So I'm trying to decide which one to use. I'm gonna get that just so that I can see the impact of food. So that way I guilt trip myself. So that anytime I'm thinking about grabbing the cookie, that anytime I look at alcohol, the impact on my HRV is always in my mind. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not gonna have any. So I think the next step is like kind of looking at a lot of this like data like on your brain activity to figure out like what's the impact of like me getting upset in this situation or the that's kind of like where I feel is pretty exciting.
Yeah, exactly, and you're nailing it, because like you're your consumer, of tech products, and a great example of where people are looking, right? So you want to know if you're sleeping. You don't have an idea of how well you're sleeping. I mean, you go to bed and you wake up in the morning, and if had apnea events, or snoring, you don't know. And the Oura Ring or the Whoop device, that gives you a pretty good sense, of whether your sleep is efficient or not, and they're getting better and better at detecting sleep staging, um, as well as you would if you went into a sleep lab to have like an actual sleep test. So that information being integrated with all of the other metrics, including blood-based metrics, right? So when you do, there's another company that Huberman likes to talk about, is Inside Tracker, right? That gives you blood-based information and about what's going on in your bloodstream, of all the different biomarkers that are spiking or just all over the place, but not in real time, right? So if you do it once, you'll get a snapshot of what's going on for you at that moment, and that will be helpful. It's not like you get that every day, but if you were able to look at it in real time, much better, because things change variably throughout the day, and there's circadian effects that you can monitor in the morning that are different in the evening. You can look at what happens when your blood sugar spikes, but we don't have that data accessible at every moment in a dynamic way. So for all your investors out there who are listening, like what to do, well, there you go. How to integrate all that data in one place that's meaningful and can have an effect on our choices and our behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's also really interesting is that maybe it's just me because of the crowd that I'm around, but I do know more and more people who are not millionaires, and they're starting to pay cash, like continuous glucose monitors. Like, who would have thought like 10 years ago, it's like, yeah, non-diabetic people are going to be wearing these because they're just interested. And so I think there's more and more of an appetite in at least in the US consumer markets for cash-based services and technology in healthcare to kind of extend beyond just like pathology, but in terms of the world of like longevity and well-being, et cetera. So I think it's pretty exciting. Last question for you before we let you go. I know you got to hop, and we appreciate you coming on the show. So for the intro person who's just starting with meditation, everything you mentioned, like Muse, maybe Mendy's one of them. For somebody who's a little bit more advanced and wants something that's a little bit more robust, any devices, companies that you recommend checking out?
Well, I work for a company called Round Glass, and we're trying to build, content streams and programming specifically for every user. The biggest problem that we have with apps is engagement, retaining people with engagement. So whether you're looking at Insight, Headspace or Calm or whatever app you're using, the hard part is using it consistently. We all want the benefits without having to do the effort. And so the hard part is just finding an app that works for you, that keeps you engaged, right? And has content and practices that like are standard core fundamental practices, like the Satipatthana Sutta talked about, which is just focusing attention on the breath, right? That is the most effective way at stabilizing concentration and gaining insight into our mental habits. And so that practice, you can find anywhere. You don't need, any specific app to help you with that, but you have to just find the one that works well for you, and then keeps you engaged. That's the critical part, is finding or making the time, prioritizing your meditation for yourself so you can actually benefit, right? So by sitting on a cushion is one way to do it, but you can do these breathwork practices all the time when you're just waiting in line at the grocery store, or when you just wake up out of bed before you step into your world of stress. Just take a few box breathing exercises, or try some 4-7-8 interval breathing before while you're trying to go to bed, to get out of your head. So there's a lot of practices you can do, and I don't think any one app is any better than another. Learning what those core practices are and sticking to them, like doing them every day, making the time to do them, is critical.
Got it. That's fantastic. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been really fascinating. Looking forward to having you back on, because I feel like this is an area that's definitely going to get more interest and, obviously more investment dollars moving into it, because I feel like every other day I'm seeing more devices and technologies getting funded for this. In the meantime, where can people follow? Do you have are you active somewhere online? Do you have a website?
Yeah. You can go to contemplativeneurosciences.com and you can find a lot of my work there and resources available for anyone interested in meditation. I'm on the executive committee for a new society called the International Society for Contemplative Research. And we host a conference every year. This one's going to be in Italy. And there's going to be, the top researchers in meditation and psychedelics will be presenting there in June. You can go to iscrsociety.org. And you could always just go to my website, the contemplativeneurosciences.com, and find everything you need to know.
Perfect. I think you're on and active on LinkedIn, correct?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm all over. But you just Google me and you'll find me.
Perfect. Awesome. David, thank you so much for joining us. Give David a follow. Go check out his website, contemplativeneurosciences.com. I'm your host, Omar M. Khateeb, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you for enjoying another epic episode of the State of MedTech. If you're feeling inspired and love this episode, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you never miss an episode. And be sure to give us 5 stars and write a short review, because that helps more people discover this amazing community of ours. If you're a company who has a executive that you'd like to be on the show, or perhaps you want to sponsor one of the episodes, shoot us an email at hello@khateebandco.com. Take care, and we'll see you next time.